Oppenheimer today. So, yeah, let's get into that a little bit. Written and directed by Christopher Nolan, Oppenheimer chronicles the life of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, and is an adaptation of the 2005 biography American Prometheus by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. The film stars Cillian Murphy as Robert Oppenheimer and features performances from Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Josh Hartnett, Florence Pugh, Kenneth Branagh, and so many more people, like too many to list. But
Yeah,
it's yeah. What are your initial thoughts on Oppenheimer? Non-spoilers for now.
it's a masterpiece, man. Like, I
Yeah.
know so many people keep saying that, but I really do think that this is probably Nolan's best work.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like there are moments in the film, just because it's kind of a little bit more dialogue heavy of a film. It's just kind of a lot of people talking in rooms
Mm-hmm.
to each other. It can get a little slow,
Okay.
but I don't think that the movie really slows down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think the music kind of keeps a good cadence throughout the film, and the pacing's really good. And you got these kind of little different narratives going on in different time periods. Just kind of how Nolan likes to do his things
Yeah, he
too.
loves to play with time, and this movie does that as well, but not in the time travel sense or anything. More akin to how Dunkirk does it than a lot of his other films, even though it's still different than that.
Yeah, yeah. I'd kind of he played a lot with it in like films like Memento.
Inception,
That
of course,
yeah,
as well.
Inception, exactly. So it just kind of that stuff comes back here. But yeah, I think I really just can't find a lot to complain about this movie, and I'm not always looking for things to complain. I feel like I'm very positive on this
Mm-hmm.
film. I think there's great performances across the board. Just wish the film was maybe a little bit shorter, because 3 hours
Okay.
is a little long. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. What about you, Dylan?
Yeah, I mean, like, I wish it was shorter in the sense that I would like to go pee at a certain point, but other than that, I feel like this is astonishingly good. I
Hmm.
also, as a side note, love that an R-rated biopic consisting almost exclusively of scenes where people are talking in rooms is being so universally celebrated and doing really well financially. It's incredible to see, and I think it shows that audiences still want this, in a decade and a half dominated by superhero movies, which both of us love. A lot of people, it seemed like, we're sort of fine to leave this brand of cinema behind in flavor of popcorn flair. But this is a type of blockbuster we don't get as much anymore, and I hope we get more of it as a result of this. And
Hmm.
yeah, while the majority of the film is people in rooms talking, though, I actually didn't feel like it was slow at all. I thought the narrative momentum was fantastic, pretty much from start to finish, and
Yeah.
brilliant performances across the board as well. So,
Yeah, it's got a strong narrative, beautiful cinematography too.
mhm.
Like, I don't necessarily think that you need to see this film in IMAX, but I did appreciate the IMAX experience too. And I am a fan of Nolan's films. Like,
Mhm.
you can just go watch our episode on The Dark Knight,
Yeah.
and you could just see just how much we love his stuff. And
Mhm.
I appreciate too, just like compared to that film, this, because those films, we've kind of talked about it ad nauseum in that episode of our podcast.
Mhm.
But that film is a little bit more pro cop and a little bit more like uh, um,
It
kind
is a
of
little bit
glosses.
propaganda. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little bit propaganda, but this film, it feels a little bit more honest and critical of
Mhm.
America and the military and our government as well, which I appreciate. And that's not,
Mhm.
it's just nice to see this story as well, this story come to light of Oppenheimer.
Yes. And I do think one thing that's interesting is the emotional contrast you will probably feel watching this, because structurally there is a lot of, we have to get this team together and accomplish this impossible task to beat the Nazis. But if you know your history at all, you know what happened. So there is this dread in you as well. So you have the almost like sense of excitement to see them succeed at this scientific achievement that they need to do to beat the Nazis within the fiction of the movie. But you are weighed down by the truth of what happens and how horrifying this thing they create really is. And I thought the film really played with that very, very well. Um, and
Yes.
it is, we'll talk more about this a little bit in spoilers, but this is a character study on Robert Oppenheimer. It is not a film about the Manhattan Project, even. It's not about Japan or the Japanese people. It's not about America, really, although it kind of is more than the other things. It's about Robert Oppenheimer. It's a biopic. And we'll talk about more why I'm stating that here in spoilers. But there
Yeah.
have been some critiques against the film along those veins that I think are unfair. And I'll explain more why I feel that way in the spoilers section. But yeah, any other things you want to say in non-spoilers here?
Well, yeah, I mean, we already mentioned it. It's an adaptation of his biography,
Mhm.
and what, when we were doing research for this episode, what I found was that much of what was depicted in the film is pulled directly from that book. Like, it's a
Yeah.
pretty truthful adaptation, I would say.
Mhm.
There are certain scenes that were not included in the book, like Strauss's confirmation hearing. That's something that he did some digging on and actually found, or Nolan found on
Oh,
his
okay.
own. But yeah, I mean, it's this is just a fascinating film, and on top of it being a story about Robert Oppenheimer, dubbed the father of the atom bomb,
Mhm.
we have these themes prevalent through the film of like just fervent nationalism and just blind patriotism too,
Yeah.
which I think is a very potent message in our society today,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about later too. But I appreciate that it really did hone in on those themes in this film, and I hope that when people watch this film, um, that it will kind of help them. It will illuminate anybody who has like an anti-communist or an anti-socialist viewpoint in
Mhm.
America. Not saying that's gonna happen, but I feel like
It won't.
that's what movies are supposed to do. They're
Yeah.
supposed to inspire some change in
Make you
people, and
think a little bit.
yeah, yeah, show
And
you a different perspective.
yeah, and elements of the McCarthy era are part of this story as well. And yeah, that's a big part of it. But the one thing I think is very interesting is they say it in the trailer, so I don't think this is a spoiler, but they view what they're doing as a race against the Nazis. And I think that makes it, and this is not to like let the Empire of Japan off the hook either. Like, they did terrible things as well, but I think when you are doing something that might be morally not so great, it makes it a lot easier to do that when you're like, well, I'm fighting the Nazis. Like, I gotta, I'm
Yep.
fighting the worst of the worst. And I think that is a lot of how America, both at the time and especially since then, has characterized our role in the war, World War II, is just we were fighting against the Nazis. It's like, yeah, we were, but we were doing a whole lot of other things too, and a whole lot of what went on towards the end of the war, specifically in the Pacific arena, um, was about preparing for the Cold War more than it was about winning World War II. And we'll talk about that more a bit later. But I will say, even before spoilers, um, there is a YouTuber named Sean. He has a 2-hour, 20-minute YouTube video. It's a documentary
Mhm.
video about the dropping of the atomic bombs. If you want a non-narrative, historical, documentary style breakdown of everything that went into the decision to drop those bombs, I would recommend watching that. It is very
Hmm.
informative, and maybe you, if you're an American, know less about that event than you think you do. So
Yeah, right. Well, I certainly did, and
mhm,
there, you've got the Manhattan Project sprinkled in here into this film, but there's a lot of Robert Oppenheimer's life, and everything that he did. So you get some before, you get some after the Manhattan Project, and I think it really kind of rounds out the experience too.
mhm,
But kind of one of the last things that I'll say before we move on is just going back to the Barbenheimer thing. I just thought it was just so pleasant to see these two movies not necessarily competing against each other, but like bringing people back to the theaters. And
I agree.
I also appreciated the marketing for both of these movies. Like
Hmm.
they honestly didn't need to run ads like for these, because like I just felt like it was just all user generated content of just being like, you know, one ticket for Oppenheimer, please. One ticket for Barbie,
Hmm.
please. Like, you know, like
Yeah, it really
everyone
worked
was just
out.
kind of getting in on it.
Right. And it's like you just know the studios are going to learn the wrong lessons from this and try to make another Barbenheimer a thing. And
Yeah.
what they don't realize is that you can't engineer this to happen. Like as soon as it gets a whiff of like corporate uh decision making behind it, like it's toast. No one's gonna want to do it. And eventually
Hmm.
the studios did get on board with the Barbenheimer thing, but it was started by like fans. But last thing I'll say before spoilers too, it's just overall this film is extraordinary. It's easily one of Nolan's best films ever. Maybe it is his best. I don't know. I need to rewatch it because there's so much that I'm sure I missed. But yeah, let's.
Absolutely. Well, I feel like that's like in a lot of his films, like even I've watched Memento probably like 2 or 3 times, and every
Mhm.
time I go back, I'm like, there's something new here.
Yeah,
And I'm, you know, I don't feel like that as much with Inception, but there's still those things that come
oh
come
yeah,
back like kind of full circle.
totally. You want to do spoilers?
Let's dive in.